Well, hello everybody, and happy Monday. I hope you all have had a fantastic weekend. I got to tell you, it is so cold here. The freezing winter has literally, in the last week, just snuck in. I mean, we've had a late summer for sure, but man, it's chilly. So I've been shivering my ass off, and I hope you all are sweating it up there in America,
It's
feeling our
been raining
sun. At
nonstop.
least
It's
give me
so hot. It's
5 degrees.
do
Give
what?
me 5 degrees. I just want 5 degrees, please. That'll make a huge difference.
I'll send some
I
of the
don't
boom
mind getting
sweat your
chilly. I
way.
don't want to freeze. Oh wow.
Oh,
Welcome everybody. Nice to see you all in the chats again, our beautiful usual suspects. And of course our lovely Professor Brice, who's turning some more pages in the books of history so we can learn all about Gioffre Borgia.
great.
I mean, he's not a baby of the family, and his wife, actually. I mean, this is actually turning out, Bryce, you and I were just talking off air a little bit. Um, it's actually turning out to be super interesting because, I mean, this then gets us to investigating, or you rather, I say us like I'm investigating with you. I mean, like, I wish. um, but looking at the Borgias and the startup of the Jesuit Catholics.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're going to be getting into some of their descendants because I was telling you off
Wow.
air, Shanti, I think something that the Aluma Shmati underestimated is some of our abilities to be petty. The Illumashmati is going to lock us down. I'm going to dig through your records. I'm going to look and I'm going to find who had what baby and what baby had what baby. And I'm going to hit on some nuggets of gold. And I have a very sneaking suspicion. We know that Pope Francis has bragged about being of Borgia descent, but I have a very sneaking suspicion that this family has been quite a problem for humanity for a very long time. And so it's I was telling you offline too, Shanti, off filming, that the interesting about Joffrey, he's the baby of the family of the Borgia Four, and he's the least famous of the Borgia Four. So it's hard to get as much information about him than the other three, the notorious other three, Juan, Cesare, and Lucrezia. However, I don't think that this is I think this is very intentional because I'm going to put a call out, Shanti. If we have any listeners, any friends out there who are from Naples, and by from Naples, I mean like your family is Italian for many generations. I am wondering what you actually know about the Borgias, because let me tell you, my friends, I've already kind of looked through Joffrey's like descendants. Out of all four of the notorious children of Rodrigo, Joffrey's descendants are like the most authoritarian. Like he has got for it is like documented for centuries his descendants ruled Naples. And then at some point they kind of fade away, but we know they never really fade away, right? At some point they kind of, I think, just kind of go into the shadows. And we also know that there are probably many Borgias out there that don't carry the last name Borgia because they're a daughter or a granddaughter. And this is going to get interesting with Joffrey's first wife, Sancha, because this is where we get the Orsinis too involved, and Jerusalem involved as well. So there are so many like hidden nooks and crannies. Even though people might think Joffrey's story is the most boring, it actually is the one that opens the door to way more information regarding our world today. So anyway, I mean, I sent you, Shanti, I sent you a painting of Sancho, his first wife, but I couldn't even find a painting of Joffrey that still exists. And that's
Well, I
weird
saw
to me.
pictures of him as a kid. So the one that I put on the cover of the
There's,
thumbnail
oh, I didn't even
of
see
was
that.
as a little boy.
There's actors, like I've used actors that play him before, but they can't. So that tells me, like, how in the world are we missing paintings? That's Sancha, his wife. We're going to get to her. She's super interesting. How in the world are there all these paintings of the Borgias? Were the most powerful family in Europe at this time. They were also the wealthiest family in Europe at this time. So you mean to tell me that we're missing paintings of his youngest son, Gioffre? Like no, we have so many, I call a foul. I think they're trying to hide him. That's just my guess, because the Illuma Schmati is smart, but sometimes they repeat the same patterns over and over again. And so we figure out the patterns and we start to notice them. So, yeah, so let's get into it, guys. So Gioffre Borgia, he's, again, the younger brother of Cesare I and Lucrezia. He was born in 1481. Now, when he was 12 years old, this just unnerves me, you guys, how young these kids were. When he was 12 years old, he married Sancha of Aragon. Okay, and that most of his childhood, we don't really have much information about his childhood. I would assume it's the same as most of his siblings. He was highly educated. You know, he was the Pope's son, blah, blah, blah. But 2 years after his daddy became Pope, he married Sancha of Aragon. Now, let's talk a little bit about this alliance. Sancha has come up in other episodes before, because Sancha's brother Alfonso was Lucrezia's second husband, her full-blooded brother. And that was the husband that Lucrezia loved. All right, so that's Sancha's brother. Now, I'm reading a book right now called The Borgia Bride. Now, this is a fictitious book, but it's based on Sancha Borgia, and it's got historical, like this historical timeline. We don't know, you know, like it's hard for us to really know, besides like journal entries, how the personality of these people. Like we kind of know about Lucrezia because of things people wrote. We know about Cesare because of The Prince, written by Machiavelli. You know, like we know certain things about their personality just from literature. But with that being said, with some of these big characters, it's kind of unnerving because we just have so I'm enjoying this book because it brings life to Sancha. With that being said, there are documentaries out there about Sancha of Aragon, but they're all in Spanish or Italian. I don't speak either. So anyway, I want to talk a little bit about her. So 12 years old. My nephew is going to be 12 in October, end of October. I cannot imagine a 12-year-old getting married. And Sancha was a little bit older than Gioffre. She was more around Juan and Cesare's age. And as you guys know, we've talked about this. She became a mistress, a lover to both Cesare and Juan. So the little brother's wife became the lover of his two older brothers. They shared her. You think your family...
Wasn't this somewhere in Game of Thrones?
Probably. I think Game of Thrones is a hodgepodge of all these people's. I mean,
I seem to recall... I mean, I watched a bit of Game of Thrones, not everything, but there was these names. I know Sancha and Gioffre, those names are Lucrezia.
There were the twins that were lovers. There were,
yes,
which was based off of Lucrezia, Circe. So Circe Lancaster was based off of Lucrezia. Now,
yes, that's right.
This is just I mean, I cannot imagine. This is how perverted. And again, I've said this before. I try to come at this practically minded because we know that, you know, there's a famous quote. I'm going to paraphrase it. It's like, history is a foreign country. They do things differently there. We know that historically speaking, I think sometimes if you were to take me and put me back in the 1500s, I don't know if I would survive, because our society is so, I'd probably be stoned to death in the first 5 minutes because I would voice my opinion too much, you know, like, you know, they're, and I've said this before, what's very peculiar about this time in history, their view of intimacy, we'll say, because we're on YouTube, so you like marital relations, we'll say, was very laissez-faire. Like they did not have, you know, a lot of people had mistresses, that a lot of, a lot of them had, you know, because their marriages were politically aligned. They weren't love marriages. However, even though they were really open about their sexuality, it wasn't that big of a deal. They were very, very conservative about the legitimacy of a child, meaning a child being born into wedlock. Whereas now in our world, I feel like we're more conservative when it comes to intimacy, but we don't care if we don't see a child born out of wedlock or in wedlock as being even a thing anymore, right? So it's just interesting. So you know, looking at the fact that Gioffre's wife was his older brother's mistress, part of me thinks, gross, that's so disgusting, and how could they do that? But then part of me is like, maybe that's just how it was back then. Like maybe they just, I don't know. Now, in a
I
lot of
think it was like a big fat free for all then, seriously.
and we know
But I can't imagine that the men wouldn't have felt territorial. I mean,
that
a
is
brother,
like,
yeah.
we know, we've heard from like Jesse and other whistleblowers that this Aluma Shmati, that they view intimacy very differently anyway, right? Like they
Yeah,
bang each other a lot. They boink each other a lot, right? And maybe that's, maybe if you're have a little psychopathy, maybe it's easier. Maybe we just, as normal human beings with empathy and love, maybe we view intimacy as a high responsibility and there needs to be love. I don't know, but that, we know that happened. Now, in a lot of these made for TV documentaries and like series, they always show Sancha Borgia, Sancha of Aragon, Joffrey's wife, is kind of being a little hussy, kind of like Lucrezia. Like she's just, out there whoring herself around. But this book proposes a very different perspective of her, which gives me kind of the perspective that I take on Lucrezia, that perhaps we're looking at Sancha all wrong. Perhaps she was just, being RAPED'd, possibly. Women didn't really have a voice back then. That wasn't a crime back then, and so she was also, like Lucrezia, she was also her father's pawn, right? She was a woman, and she was born into one of the most powerful families, noble families at this time, which we're going to talk about. Now, the interesting thing about both Sancha and Alfonso, they were both also illegitimate. So they were, even though their father was the king of Naples, they were his illegitimate children. But even though most of the time the legitimate children were given more advantages, we do see throughout history where some monarchs have legitimized their own illegitimate children for political strategy. But with Sancha and Alfonso, they married other illegitimate noble children, because obviously the Pope is only going to have illegitimate children. Now, in the political climate of this time, where Joffrey was being arranged to marry Sancha, again, Sancha's father had just become the king of Naples. His father, her grandfather, was the lovely Ferdinand I, which we spoke about back when we spoke about Pope Innocent VIII. Ferdinand I was the king, rather, who had the Black Museum. So where he took his enemies and he stuffed them. And this book actually talks about it. It talks about that in this book. Yeah, with the
so like a taxidermist.
Yep. So Ferdinand I of Naples, he was the king for a very long time. So again, remember at this time. So this is how we kind of reviewed, understand why Joffrey had to marry her at such a young age. So Italy at this time, what we call Italy today, was not a political entity. It was not a country. It was just a peninsula. And you have these little like principalities or duchies. So you have like Naples is in the south. And I've said this before, what's very fascinating about the political climate of the Italian peninsula at this time will go on to be the political climate of the newly found American continent. So they tell us in our mainstream history, again, question mark over that, because Italy, especially Naples, South Italy, was very lucrative, right? We're talking about, you have perfect weather for growth, for a product, for produce, right? So there is reasons why, and I think there's other reasons too. Of course, we can talk portals and all the other stuff as well that they're looking for too. But we also, from just a mainstream perspective, countries are fighting over these principalities because they can market, they can make money and have power and land, owning these very lucrative places of property on the Italian peninsula. So you've got like the duchy, you've got Florence, Venice, Milan, you've got the Papal States, which is right in the middle of it all. And at that point, the Papal States themselves were their own duchy. So the Papal States were ruled by the Pope. So at this point, we see the Pope, us human beings, us normal people, see the Pope as strictly being a religious icon. And he's not, which we're going to get into that with the Jesuits when we talk about he's not just, absolutely not just a spiritual, he never has been just a spiritual icon. He's always been a monarchy. So the Pope is his own kingdom. Now, again, the difference between the Pope and the rest of the monarchies is it's not, I say it's not bloodline. We know they're all part kind of the same bloodlines, but it's not passed on from father to son like most monarchies, right? You have a fighting chance to be the Pope. Yeah. So it's a different kind of monarchy than the rest of the monarchies. Now, the rest of the monarchies, whether it's in a country or a principality, all have to take the knee to the Pope. So the Pope sits on top of the pyramid, right? So at this point, Pope Alexander the Sixth, he is literally, as I call, he's the kingiest of kings. He's the most important person in the secular world and in the spiritual world on the planet at this time. The best comment I said I've seen so far is how badass to say my daddy's the Pope. So the children of Pope Alexander the Sixth are also the most lucrative and I don't want to say important because we know all children are important, but as far as a political scene, the children are important because that is going to secure different principalities if they have the support of the papal state. I hope that makes sense. Remember, the papacy has its own military. It's the wealthiest place in the lands. And so if you are in alliance with the Pope, you're good. Right? Like you're good. And that's why it was advantageous for these popes to have illegitimate children, because it turns into this, I scratch your back, you scratch mine for power. These kings can manipulate like giving the children titles, giving the children land to expand the house of Borgia, to give the family more power outside of just the papacy. Right? Because once the Pope dies, that's it. The kids cannot inherit from the Vatican. So when the Pope's alive, he's trying to secure his bloodline, right, around the world, that they have their own holdings. So this is what we're dealing with.
Such deception, isn't it? I mean, I cannot get over the deception that these monarchies are built upon.
Yeah.
And as we know, anything that is based on deception is never going to last. It's going to last for a while. And yes, they've had their throne for a while and they've wreaked havoc on this planet and with us humans and what have you. We all participated on some level. Some of us got sucked in hook, line, and sinker. Others like, nah, I'm not going there. But, I think we have to realize how powerful this deception of the Catholic Church is. So if we're looking, so many of us at this stage, all I hear every second day is, who's the Antichrist? Who's the Antichrist? Blah, blah, blah. It's not about who. And those of you who've been listening to Caleb's stuff will talk about how they had to collect the 10 masks that all had from the living ships, that all had a life of their own, and put together, that was the crown for the AC. But it's a whole system, the system of the beast.
Yeah.
It's a system that has been in action for many, many, many decades. And yes, maybe now they're going to crown someone that actually, because literally what Caleb says is you put that mask on, your whole consciousness changes. It's like you suddenly downloading information from a completely different realm. He says you get superpowers like on another level. So it's all angelic technology, right?
Yeah.
From the fallen angels. So of course it's powerful, and that's what they've been looking for. But it's not. Yes, a person has that, but it's an entire system.
Yeah.
And the Catholic Church is the head of that boil.
Yeah.
It's the head of the boil. It's where it always has been happening, and more fingers are pointing in that direction. We can no longer deny it. Many years ago, it started off with the Catholic priests and their their shenanigans with young boys. I was always horrified that was allowed, and I could never understand why.
Oh,
But
that was the
obviously,
least of it. Then that's just the top of it.
exactly.
Yeah, then you start. Well, I was actually did a show with my friend Tamara this morning. It's actually processing right now. We kind of talked about this a little bit, and I'm like, what we fail to recognize, I think, and it's again, history is a foreign country. They do things differently there. Back at the time of the Borgias and other royalties, like we've got this dude Fernando who's got a black museum of taxidermied human beings that he shows off. The fact during this time, there was even more of a divide between the have and the have-nots. The Aluma Shmati could definitely, they could flaunt and they flaunt their religion still to this day, but they do it in more coded stuff now, right? But back then, they were way more open about it. Like I've said before, back then, people knew that the reason why the Pope or the bishops couldn't get married was because the kids they didn't want the kids to be able to inherit the money of the Vatican. They wanted to keep it consolidated in the Vatican. But now we think it's because Jesus wasn't married. So back then people knew that Joshua was indeed married and had children. They knew that the policies around the Vatican, though, had to do with inherited wealth, but they had to change the story as we evolved and started figuring some things out to continue to manipulate us. And that's what's interesting that's why I think history is so important for us to understand where we've been manipulated. And I agree with you. Like, I don't want to sit around and I want to clarify too, and saying this is that, it really hurts my heart when I see like truthers out there saying that a particular family needs to be like murdered or unalived just because they're that family or a particular bloodline. And to me, that's no different than wanting somebody to be unalive because of the color of their skin. We have to remember that with every single human being born on this earth, regardless of who their parents are, who their lineage is, they have their own free will choice. So, we do need to look at the people around us today through the law and order and have because look at people like Jesse or Caleb, like they came from this. And if it wasn't for people like that, we would not know what we know. And so God bless those human beings who were born into these horrific families and decide to do the right thing. God bless them for choosing that karma. And we have to, we look at things like with Archbishop Vigano that's just happened. I know there are probably some people in the Catholic hierarchy or the employment, we'll say, of the Catholic Church that are probably horrified at what's going on. They're probably few and far between by the time you get to that stage, and they probably are few and far between because the minute they get to that stage, if they didn't know what was going on before they got to that stage, they're probably keeping their mouth shut because they know they could be murdered if they say something. Right. And we have to have empathy for those people, too. I think, moving forward, we have to be understanding of the people who didn't say anything because they were scared, because we're kind of in that position, Shanti, because we get threats all the time. But let's use that. Like, look at all the threats we get, Shanti, and we're just YouTubers. Could you imagine, the stuff? And we know what our friends who are whistleblowers have gone through off camera. Like, we have to have empathy and understand that this is complex. That's what I say about Lucrezia. I know a lot of people still want to hold Lucrezia to this very different standards as her brothers and give her the Scarlet A. But from what I read about Lucrezia, she literally was a victim of her own family as well. Right. And she did what she could. We have to have that understanding, especially as
there's no doubt in my mind, Brice, when you talk about her being a victim of her own family. I mean, all we have to do is just go and read a few historical novels, right?
Yeah.
And the sauciness about the sexuality and the scandalous nature, not just from what we're seeing here, but I remember all the time because my mother is very into history and the royal families and stuff, so I grew up learning a lot about them. But there's always been one sex scandal after the other, one infidelity after the other, right? And when you look at the kids, I mean, look at although were the kids sexually abused back then? That would be a question that we don't know.
We might have more answers for that next week, guys. I'm not going to say why, but Yeah, we don't know that. We don't know. We know that they were being married off very early, and we know that that can cause, nowadays, we know that even just to be 12 years old and to be married off, even if you're in wedlock, that can still be extremely traumatic because the brain's not developed yet. And there was no, I mean, that's the same with this. There's a very interesting scene in this book where Sancha goes to like a soothsayer. And Sancha at the beginning of this book is very paranoid about the cruelty of her grandfather. And she worries that that's in her as well. And the soothsayer tells her, like, you have a good heart, but you're going to have to, at some point, use the darkness you inherited to protect yourself, which I think is very interesting, you know, that put that way. And so I feel like we can't, especially the women, we can't really judge them because they weren't autonomous beings themselves. They were at the mercy. I've said this before. I'll say it again. Listen, y'all, if I, as a woman right now, if gun to my head, if someone was like, you have to go back and live in the 1400s in Europe, you have a choice. You can either be a nobility or a princess, or you can be a peasant. I'd be like, give me the peasant, you know, because the women of the peasantry or the commoners at this point in history seem to have more autonomy and self-governance than the nobility had. Like no riches in the world can compensate for you not having a sense of self or a sense of your own power or being used and abused by your father. But that's what's so
right.
By your own brothers.
Right.
What was she, and there's no court. It's not like she can run up to the police station and be like, my brother RAPE'd me. She can't do that. She's not a human being. She doesn't have legal authority to file charges against anybody. So this trauma, because make no mistake about it, they're experiencing trauma. That's what SRA is for, is to complain. Now, something interesting too, I don't know if I've ever shared this before, according to the Cassiopeans, we talk about organic portals, people without souls. They say that a lot of times in these rituals where they traumatize these children, the ones who survive the trauma and disassociate, those are the children who have souls. The ones who don't have souls, they're organic portals. That's how they weed out the organic portals. They die. So it's interesting that Rodrigo Borgia, we talked that he had a lot of children, not just these four, and a lot of them did die in childhood and infancy. And it could have just been the time. It could have just been that happened more frequently back then, but it does put a question mark over why did these children die? What happened? And why did these four live on to become notorious? So with that being said, if that what the Cassiopean says is true, and let's say at this time in history, they perhaps were doing rituals to these children, my heart breaks even more for them because there's no gold in the world.
Brice, if we just go back to some of the earliest teachings in history, or those statues, let's go back to the historical statues. Is it the Old Norse? I think, is it? I can't remember. But North these culture? Gods standing, throwing babies into the fire.
Greek statues of them eating babies?
Greek. Yes, yes. So that's kind of been going on forever. The abuse of kids has been going on forever.
Yeah.
And I think that is certainly a religious thing. That's when religion started taking over.
Yeah.
And that religion made God as a masculine or a male. So then the patriarchy started governing. You know what they say, before the patriarchal age was the matriarchal age. Mm-hmm. And that's where woman or the feminine energy ruled. And we abused our power tenfold. We abused, we made men the slaves. They were just there for their sperm.
Yep.
Whatever, you know. And then when the scales started flipping, and that because then when the scales started flipping from the matriarchal age to the patriarchal age, what happened then? Women agreed to shut down their expression center, and men agreed to shut down their sacral center, in other words, their feeling center. So then we would operate where women find it very difficult to express their magic, because their magic is communication, and just the beauty of words, whatever the case might be, and just the feminine spirit, like in expression, all of that was now trapped. right?
Yeah.
And then the male energy then obviously has the lack of emotional stuff. So when we look at that, and we see how that's carried forward into the patriarchal age, where we're dominated by a masculine psyche. And all through that, we look at that through all these things, and we see how that masculine psyche, and it's not a nice one. There's good and bad, but it plays itself out through all of this stuff. And this is what I'm saying. It's interesting for me to look how history continuously plays itself out in the same way, actually. Yeah.
It brings humanity to these people, you know, and I will have nothing but the utmost empathy and respect for people like Lucrezia and Sancha, because as a woman myself, and I think most women watching, born into the modern times where I can go to the police station and I do have a voice to an extent, I know what it's like to be assaulted. I know what it's like to, you know, and to feel that powerless. And the fact that these women had this happen to them and nobody cared. In fact, it was part of the program. It was part of like their father and brothers reach for power. And so like with Sancha, and do you have that picture again to put up of Sancha the painting we have of Sancha of Argon? Sancha of Argon and Lucrezia end up becoming very good friends, as very close as sister-in-laws. And Sancha, like Lucrezia, both of these women were known throughout Italy for their beauty. They were both very beautiful women. And so with that being said, now Sancha herself is a high ticket, because let's talk a little bit about Sancha's lineage. So again, Sancha is Alfonso II of Naples' daughter. She's Ferdinand I of Naples' granddaughter, the guy who had the Black Museum. Well, her father's maternal great uncle, so Alfonso II, his mother's uncle, his great uncle, was Giovanni Antonio del Balazzo Orsini. Where does that ring a bell? So Alfonso is also an Orsini. So Sancha is also an Orsini. Okay,
right.
That family name comes up a lot this time period and in our own time period. Now, Giovanni Orsini, after the Crusades, he was known as, drum roll please, the King of Jerusalem. So the Orsini, this Orsini dude controlled Jerusalem
wow.
from the Crusades. All right. So it kind of goes into line with the whole Cesare Borgia, the Jesus painting, the control of religion, all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
So when this Orsini died, Alfonso II, Sancha's father, was 15 years old, and he also inherited that title. So Sancha's father not only is the King of Naples, the most lucrative and prosperous principality in the Italian peninsula, but he is also the King of Jerusalem from the Crusades. This woman that you're looking at right here, she is a big ticket item. And that is how she's described. I wrote that directly from a lot of the historian books. The fact that a human being is described as a big ticket item is absolutely messed up to me. But this is how she was viewed by the rest of the world. Because these things, they knew back then. They knew who her father was, right? That might get, and that's why I tell you guys, if you ever research these people, I would not have found that if I didn't look to see who Alfonso's parents were. That's what I do. I just keep looking back at different people and looking forward, and that's when I found that. Okay, so the information's out there. It might not pop up right away. Some of that stuff I think they keep hidden. You got to be petty like me to find this stuff. So now with Naples as well. So Fernando I of Naples had taken Naples from the French. So he had conquered Naples for the Spanish. So now it's Spanish dominated from the French. At the point of Gioffre and Sancha's marriage, Pope Alexander VI had appointed a bunch of French cardinals. Now, I think Alexander VI, Rodrigo Borgia, did this intentionally, because now this puts Naples backed up in a corner, even though Rodrigo Borgia himself is also Spanish. So now Alfonso II of Naples, his father's now passed away, he is now the king. He's desperate because he knows his arch enemy, the French, are now totally in the pocket of Rodrigo Borgia, the Pope.
Right.
So how is Alfonso II going to secure a tighter alliance with the papacy against the French? By offering Sancha. And eventually, Alfonso gets offered to Lucrezia. All right. So here, and I think Borgia did this intentionally to make it more lucrative to offer up Sancha. Because here's the thing, more so than Alfonso, because here's the thing about the women. All right. Sancha, as I said, according to the law at this time, she's not an autonomous being. So what happens when she gets married? Her husband gets all of her titles. Who's her husband? Now it's Gioffre Borgia. Right? Because the woman can't carry these titles. She's not a human being. She can't inherit by herself. It's got to go to the man. So Rodrigo Borgia might be many things. He might be a psychopath. He might be a terrible human. But he's pretty savvy when it comes to playing these kings at their own game and gaining more power for the Borgia family, which is still, in my opinion, and I think they're still in power today. All right. So I wrote in my notes by marrying.
I agree, Brice. Sorry to interrupt you, but I have to say I do agree. I do believe that as we dig in more and more into this, and as you're uncovering more and more of especially the Orsini bloodlines, because we know that the Grey Pope, you get the White Pope, the Black Pope, and the Grey Pope, who's the most powerful man on the planet apparently, is from the Orsini family. So when we're looking at it like that, it makes a lot of sense then. And that's actually the true shadow government.
Absolutely.
That's the true shadow government, yeah.
And the Orsinis, I mean, the Orsinis, guys, their legend is that they come from Romulus and Remus. Like, that's their family legend, that they are the original. So Sancha has Orsini blood. Not only does she have Aragon blood from the royal family of Aragon, but she also has Orsini blood. And now she's marrying a Borgia. Okay, so at 12 years old, poor little Gioffre at 12 years old, he probably just wants to play with his blocks. You know, he's now inherited all these. So that's what I'm saying too, guys. We know that they love their sons because their sons took on the family name, but their daughters were even more lucrative to these crazy psychopaths because the daughter could be married into a family and that family inherited that wealth. And so you scratch my back, I scratch yours. Yeah, this is how this works. The daughters become total pawns in this. All right, so, and I wrote, by marrying Sancha, the Borgias could massively expand their dynasty. Now, the reason why Gioffre had to be the one to marry Sancha at such a young age is because the other two boys, Juan and Cesare, were taken at this time. Juan was married. This was before Juan had been murdered. He was married to the princess in Spain, and Cesare was still in the cloth. So Cesare at this point wasn't even eligible to be married. And so that's why they married Gioffre, a 12-year-old. All right. Now, Alfonso did hand over a large dowry. In return, Alexander VI, Pope Rodrigo Borgia, recognized him as the rightful heir to Naples. So everything he was worried about the French coming in and taking Naples back, Alexander VI just went, boop, cool, now you're the rightful heir. So again, I believe Alexander VI put all those French cardinals in order to back Alfonso into the corner to give his family the titles of all these duchies, the title of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, everything. Yeah, it's a game of trade, of buying and selling, right? I mean, we know that they buy and sell humans on the sly, but this is them buying and selling their own children too. You can't tell me that this woman right here wasn't trafficked. That's what this is. It's
exactly. Glorious. And when you look at who is the Game of Thrones twins?
Cersei and I cannot help us, audience. Cersei and I forgot what her brother's name was.
Yeah, those two. Now again, when you're looking back at those ages, it was common for siblings at that stage to hook up with each other, for
Yeah, they
want of a
didn't
better
understand.
expression.
They
But
didn't know
let's
about
think about
inbreeding.
this. It's not normal. There's a reason why. I mean, and you know, when you speak to the experts, the general consensus is that the chemistry that
Yeah.
a brother and sister have, for example, it doesn't match for sexual intimacy.
No,
So that
not at
is
all.
why, and especially because it's not good for procreation, right? So when something like that happens, where siblings are incestuous all the way through into adulthood, and how many times have we not found this? I mean, what was that? The mamas and the papas, I think. And not too long ago, the one daughter, I think she might be dead now.
Yep.
She might have committed
She came
suicide.
out and talked about it. Yeah.
Yes, that was, and it's so common now when we're looking at the system. We're looking at, and I mean, so many of my survivors who've been like that have told me they were forced to do terrible things with their siblings. So the bottom line is this has been going on since forever. And again, that brings me to the question about SRA from going right back then. Was it an organized thing? Did they do it as an organized thing? Or did they see from that how it worked and then started implementing it in a more orchestrated fashion?
Hopefully we'll have answers to that next week, guys. I don't want to give it away. I don't want to give his hopes up. But yeah, it's disgusting. Like even first cousins, like genetically, you're not supposed to be attracted to your first cousin either. I mean, there are some first, like if you do your DNA testing, there are some cases where your first cousin is such a genetic match to you that the company doesn't know whether that's a sibling. They put either sibling or cousin. Like I have a cousin, one of my first cousins, a male. I won't say his name because he's private, but this particular male, who's my first cousin, his mom and my mom are sisters, and I look identical. Like we look so much alike. Even at family functions, my boyfriend will stare at my cousin and just start laughing, and he's like, you look like what Brice would look like if she were a man. And his wife will be like, yeah, it's weird, right? Well, when I did my DNA testing, before I knew it wasn't maybe the best thing to do, this particular cousin popped up as being one of the closest genetic matches to me. And it was like, is he your brother or is he? But it's and his mother, actually, my aunt, is one of my highest related genetic aunts. So sometimes the DNA is so close with first cousins that it actually reacts as siblings. Like sometimes
as siblings,
you
I'm
don't
with
know
you.
if you're a sibling or if you're a first cousin. And I always say your first cousins are your glorified siblings anyway. A lot of us grow up with our first cousins like siblings, but you're not supposed to be you're so genetically connected to your first cousins that you are absolutely, like, that's disgusting. That's absolutely, we know royalty did first cousins all the time. Disgusting. Like that is absolutely appalling.
That's what I say. You know, it's like but it's even with animals, you know, it's like these dog breeders and stuff like that.
Oh, that's why dogs have so many health problems. I will tell you, when I started rescuing dogs in India, wild dogs, I got to know the veterinarian that helps us there a lot in India. And he explained to us that in the wild, dogs in the wild, they know who their siblings are, they know who their parents are, and they know who their first cousins are. So dogs in the wild will not inbreed. They will. They know. They sense it.
I was about to say that. And yet, when they put in these breeding facilities, they're forced to inbreed.
Yep.
They're forced, and especially these highly pedigreed dogs and things. And then you see how oftentimes they get hip dysplasia.
Yep.
They have health problems. Lungs are not properly developed. Deformed in their face sometimes. You know, it's very interesting. And yet the elite, they seem to thrive on that. And that's why I believe, babe, I think that's why they brought in the 300 Illuminati families. So you're going to get, because you of course get I think it's 14 bloodlines now, because the bloodline of Ishmael has just been introduced as a bloodline in the Illuminati.
Oh, they're bringing more in then.
Yeah, the bloodline of Ishmael.
Which need more DNA. They're like,
which is Obama, by the way. I've been told that's
that's not
Obama's
shocking.
bloodline. Yeah, and then the Bilderberg 300. Those families are the 300 Illuminati families that have then obviously been picked and chosen. And if you think about this, because when you're looking at the fallen angels, right, that came and they procreated with women. Now, what Caleb has often said, and guys, a lot of people are not hearing him, but I want to point this out. The archons did not come and have sex with human women. What they came and did was they tampered with DNA.
Yeah. Oh my God, Shanti, you're giving me chill bumps because this.
Yes, they did. Listen, this is, and I'm going to tell you again. Caleb tells us this all the time. People don't hear him. It's like people don't pay attention. Now, this is a very, very important part of this equation, because they, again, what he's saying is they did not physically have sex, but they tampered with the DNA.
Oh, of course. I'm actually working. So Shanti, I had a request for somebody, because I've done the bloodlines and stuff. I had a request for somebody to do it again, to revamp it. And so I've been working, and I've got, thank you, Caleb, because that just confirms some of my research. But look what they're doing. I mean, with intravenous fertilization, which could be a positive thing in the right hands, but they can tamper with all that stuff. And it is just, the depravity of these people is just beyond me. It is beyond me. What these, I know we've laughed, Shanti, we both are O negative. We're both the bloodline that these people love. And we both have rogue family members that were born into these families. And that's another reason why I say, like, I'm the one of the many 5 times great granddaughters of Queen Victoria. And I think she's probably the most evil woman that walked the face of the earth. But thank God for my 3 times great grandfather for being like, we're not doing this anymore. Like, we're not doing this. So thank God there are people that are willing to say, no, this is despicable. This is absolutely despicable. This is not the way human beings should be treated. All human, as Billy Carson says, I love it how he says, I'm going to paraphrase. He's like, if one person on this planet is enslaved, then the whole planet's got a problem. Not one human being. Every human being should be, no animal should be enslaved.
Exactly.
It's disgusting. And so when we look at like this beautiful woman, like, isn't she gorgeous? Like, look at Sancha. She was beautiful,
Yeah.
And she was used and abused because of her DNA, because of her bloodline, and what she can offer from her inheritance. It is for women, for this time period. I mean, I talked about in my channel at the legend of the werewolf of Georgia, a girl. I think we've talked about her before, Shanti, on our channel. But anyway, in the 1800s is this girl that had the legend of being a werewolf. And I learned in that story that Georgia, the state that I live in the 19th century, was one of the first places in the world to recognize women as being able to inherit from they couldn't even have checking accounts at this point. But Georgia, the state of Georgia I live in, said no, women should be able to inherit. So before then, even in the 1700s, let's say I'm living in the 1700s or early 1800s, and my dad dies. Okay, so now my dad's estate is divided amongst the children. Because I'm a female, I can't actually inherit my portion. My brother or an uncle has to hold on to my estate until I get married and then give it to my husband. So even that didn't change until the 1800s, where women could actually rightfully inherit from their family on their own, independent of a man. And that was here in the state of Georgia. And it was one of the first places to do this. So this debacle that people like Sancha and Lucrezia are in, a lot of our ancestors were in, it is just now recently in the whole scope of history. I mean, what women, we just in the United States celebrated like the 50th anniversary of women being able to own their own checking account. People talk about the sanctity of marriage and how back in the day, people fought it out and they stayed together. And it's like, do you not understand that women couldn't even have a checking account? So if a woman is in an abusive relationship, guess what? She can't go anywhere. Where's she going to go? She can't get her own checking account. She can't have a credit card. She can't get a job unless she's in a brothel or cleaning a house, which there's no shame in cleaning houses, but there's just nowhere for her to go. And so we have to recognize that with people, instead of giving people like Sancha and Lucrezia these scarlet letters, like have that empathy that these women were in the worst situation a woman could possibly be in. But guys, I know we've only got like 10 minutes left of the show, so I'll go through this really quickly because it's really effed up what happens to Sancha. Okay. So she marries Gioffre, becomes the lover to Juan and Cesare. Now, this book proposes that wasn't her choice, that she was forced into being the lover. Now, Juan and Cesare were more age appropriate to her. She was a lot older than Gioffre. She was a fully developed teenager in her late teens, and he's 12. Like she would be like his babysitter today, right? And so anyway, but then all of a sudden we have Lucrezia marrying Alfonso. Now in the year 1500, as previously mentioned, Alfonso was murdered by the Borgias. She was very close to her brother Alfonso. We talked about that with Lucrezia's episode. So if you missed that, go back and watch that. And because the Borgias now have married Cesare off to the Bourbon line in France, which is the Paysours today. So now Rodrigo's has shifted. He's got all the titles he can from Naples. It's now with Gioffre. So now he's looking back to France. So Sancha's in trouble. So Sancha is then imprisoned and brought to the mausoleum of Hadrian, which is the same place where Juan's body was kept. So she is imprisoned, and she has to stay imprisoned until Rodrigo Borgia passes away a few years later. All right. So once she's released, she now has to raise on her own. She has to raise her brothers and Lucrezia's son, because remember, when Lucrezia marries the Estes, she can't bring her child, Rodrigo, whom she named after her father. That's also Alfonso's son, who was murdered. Sancha has to raise this child by herself, and she has to raise the Roman infant. If you remember from Lucrezia's episode, this baby appears in the Borgia family. It's called the Roman infant, and nobody knows who the baby belongs to. They suspect it's Lucrezia's baby, but no, they claim it's actually one of Rodrigo Borgia's. There's all these different papal bulls. It's very confusing about who the lineage is of this child. Some people think this child was incestual from Lucrezia and her brother Cesare. Again, that's in Lucrezia's episode if you want to go back and revisit that. But yeah, so she's got to take on these two children now. She's had all of her titles have been given to this son of a pope. She's kind of left in this mausoleum by her. She's a princess. It's been left behind by her father. And the only reason why she's in prison there is because the Pope has lost favor with Naples, right? She died in 1506. She was 27 or 28 years old. Now, there is speculation that she might have done it herself. There is speculation. I find that age to be very interesting. We know we have a 27 club. But Gioffre goes on to side with the French. He holds all the titles, even though Sancha is now dead. She had no children with Gioffre, but Gioffre still holds the titles because he's her husband and she died. So he didn't divorce her. He didn't get annulled from her. He still owns the titles that he inherited from her. But now she's out of the way. Gioffre will go on to marry one of Sancha's cousins from the same family. Her name is Maria. And through that line, with all of the titles that Gioffre stole, basically, or the Borgias stole for Gioffre from Sancha, they will continue to rule Naples. We have a direct, clear line of these descendants until about the mid-18th century, so the mid-1700s. After that, it gets really, really hazy. Now, I've noticed...
How old was Gioffre when he started ruling? Wasn't he quite young?
Gioffre ends up dying around the age of 36. He's very young. They all die young, the Borgias. But he already...
I mean, even wasn't he like a teenager when he started ruling? Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah.
And wasn't he quite cruel? He was very cruel, wasn't
Gioffre wasn't cruel. That was Cesare. Joffrey is always described as being pretty innocent.
Right.
and kind of pushed around a lot. Like he kind of gets pulled back and forth. And, you know, from what we understand of his relationship with Sancha, again, it just reminds me of like a babysitter. Like apparently Sancha was really good to Gioffre. She kind of coddled him a little bit like a babysitter would. I think Sancha, like Lucrezia, understood, was a little bit more.
She was quite a bit older than him, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so she kind of coddled him. So we don't even have any proof that their marriage was even ever consummated, you know, because of how young he was. But that doesn't matter because the Borgias can just lie. Because consummating a marriage was important back then, before she was locked up in the prison. So once Gioffre Borgia, so the House of Borgia, had all these titles in their possession from the King of Naples, they didn't need Sancha anymore. They didn't need Alfonso, her brother, anymore, because they had what they wanted from Naples. Right? So they could go for even more power. So they have to get rid of her because now she's just extra baggage that they have to support. So they lock her up in a prison. And then when she's released, she's got to raise these two children on her own. Now, again, nobody knows. She's another mystery. She's another murder mystery or unaliving mystery. We don't know how she died. Some people think she was murdered. A lot of people purport that she committed schmuicide, will say that she did it herself. If that's true, I don't actually blame her, because what a hellish life to live. I mean, I thought at that point she probably felt that she had no one. Her brother Alfonso, were very close, but there was never any like rumors about her and Alfonso like there was about Lucrezia and Cesare. There was never any rumors of incest. They were just very close siblings. They were friends, you know, and they both married Borgias and ended up living in Rome together. And once he was murdered, and she knew her father sure as hell wasn't coming for her. She knew her siblings sure as hell weren't going to come protect her. You know, we see today when women go missing, it's all over Dateline in the news. Could you imagine that for her? Sancha, here she comes from this extremely powerful family, and she's being imprisoned just because she's Spanish. And she knows her family's not coming for her. She knows nobody's going to come save her. And it's not like they don't have the means to save her. They can pull up an army if they want to come save her. No, they just leave her in this prison. She has to wait out the death of Alexander VI. And then a few years after she's released, like 3 years after she's released, she herself is unalived. So I could go either way with my opinion. I could definitely see it being her, and I would not blame her. Like that, I would have total empathy for her in that situation, that hopelessness feeling. That breaks my heart. You know, that feeling of like having everything, but also having nothing at the same time. But I could also see her being murdered. Because if she's out of the way.
What would the reason be? Okay. Sorry, you were about saying.
If she's out of the way, then the Borgias have the titles free and clear. They don't have to, and he can marry.
Well, that would make sense. That would make sense. And, you know, in my opinion, they probably kept her in jail all that time, and that wore her down. Yeah. I mean, if you think about that, when you come out of prison after so many years, you're not the same person. No. I mean, there's no way. So she must have been worn down, felt somewhat defeated, didn't have the power base that she did before. You know, doesn't have
love. Doesn't have any even familial love. Doesn't have any of her. I mean, think about that. Even with like their servants. So like, you know, a lot of these kids that are born at this time period, they grow up with nannies and servants their whole lives. And for a lot of these kids, the servants travel with them to their new castles, but for a lot of these kids, the servants and their nannies are more of their family. Like they actually have, you know, you see it. They have a great love for the nursemaids, the women that, you know, govern them. That's their family. You know, these are the people they trust. And when you're in that position, though, all of that gets stripped from you. So you don't even have the nanny or the nursemaid or the servant that had been with you your whole life, that you trusted completely and saw as a family member. You don't even have that anymore. You are utterly alone.
Yeah, alone.
Utterly alone. And so now there is some conspiracy that if she did it to herself, because her and Lucrezia were very, very close, they were very good friends as sister-in-laws. There is some conspiracy, that Lucrezia, she was notorious in conspiracy to have had a poisoned ring to give to men. And so there is some conspiracies with some historians that they kind of assume that maybe Lucrezia taught Sancha how to make these poisons, which I don't actually, as a woman, if Sancha, because Sancha and Lucrezia are very similar in their disposition, and they're both beautiful women. They're both high ticket women. They're both being put in situations where they're being stripped of their own dignity. And so if they were best friends, Shanti, if we were in that situation and I knew how to make poison, I would teach you.
I was about to say, Brice was about to say to you, hey, come now, if that was you and me, I'd sure as I'll teach you.
Because we're the only two that got each other, right? Like, no man is going to help us. There's no police force, no military. We are both watching each other be RAPE'd.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah, no, you build a special kind of bond with someone when you've gone through something like that. That's human nature. It's not something that can be pretended. So yeah, for sure, I would have said. Was she poisoned, did you say?
Well, they think that maybe she poisoned herself because Lucrezia had taught her how to do it. That she had learned it from Lucrezia, how to do it, and so she did it to herself. They talk about the specific plant that was used. I mean, I know, like, for example, like here in the Southeast or I can't say Orlander, I think that's the name of the root here that grows wildly here in the Southeast. Like, that's highly toxic and poisonous. Like,
Oleander.
Yeah. Oh, that's it.
Yeah.
Oleander. Yeah. Yeah. So like,
I know. It's crazy.
It's all over here, right? It's all over.
Don't worry. Yeah, too. It's a beautiful tree, though. So beautiful.
Right? Like these beautiful women. And that is if that is what happened again with her and Lucrezia's relationship, these women, their lives mirrored each other. That's what that makes you want to cry. Like the fact that when Lucrezia was forced to leave Rome and go marry the Estes, the son that she had to leave behind, little Rodrigo, who was Alfonso, Sancha's brother's son, the one person she wanted to raise that son was Sancha. She didn't want her family touching that son. She wanted Sancha to raise him. So there obviously was a deep bond and a deep trust between these two women. They were around the same age. Again, they were both in the exact same position. Beautiful women who were hierarchy kids in a nobility who had no effing rights to their own body and to their own lives. And if you're going to be loyal to anybody in that situation, it's going to be that woman that is going through the same hell that you are going through. You are nothing but a pawn. And how sad. So then Lucrezia sent away. So the one person, Lucrezia and Sancha had each other, and then they're pulled apart. Now Lucrezia fared better because she married a really decent person, her last marriage. So she fared better for the rest of her life. But yeah, Lisa D, I don't blame her either. Like, I don't blame her if she offed herself. I'd have total empathy for her because I cannot imagine what that must have been like for her. The depression, the heaviness, the sorrow, the grief. I just cannot, to have never been, I mean, there were plenty of men who lusted after her because she was gorgeous, but how many of those men loved her? You can't even say that about her own father loving her. And the prophecy that's claimed in this book that was told to her, that she would have to go to those dark places. Maybe that dark place to save herself was to remove herself. I don't know. I can't judge that, So that's why I hate when people say people who do that are going to hell. No, people who do that were already in hell.
Exactly.
Don't judge a person unless you've walked in their shoes, and that, bless her heart. So yeah. So you guys, like I told Shanti, like, I want to keep going with the Borgias because we got some really shady characters. Like, this is the nucleus of the Borgias. Now we got to follow the trail because we got some super shady characters and descendants of these people that made their mark in history books too. And again, I would love it if any of our friends watching know anybody from Naples, or if we have anybody from Naples that would like to email me or Shanti. I'm at esotericatlanta@gmail.com. Shanti, what's your email address?
Chantelle Meyburgh at gmail.com, as my name is spelled, all smalls, one word.
Yeah, mine is just my channel, Esoteric Atlanta Gmail, my channel, one word, my channel. I would love, and if you're watching this channel, you're awake. So if you're aware of like the governess of the Borgias in your area, because it's very strange in the 1700s, it just kind of fades away and it seems very intentional. You can't tell me that you kept perfect records from the early 1500s to the mid 1700s, like perfect, pristine records. And then all of a sudden you got sloppy? Bullshit.
Nee. Ek glo nie daai ding nie. Dit's nie waar daai nie.
Yeah. No. Like I'm like, riddle me this, that man. What are you hiding? Who are you hiding?
Yeah.
Who are these people now? Like, I want to know. So the Borgias have their bloodline literally on, in my opinion, in all y'all Luma Schmati families have a little Borgia in you. So yeah. So hopefully
Borgia. Yeah, definitely. It would come from that, wouldn't it? Because when it's very interesting for me as we go along. Just more little pieces of the puzzle just start fitting in. And that's why I say if what you're sharing with us now about the Borgias actually being the Orsini's, that makes perfect sense, because that would then be the top of the it's weird though, because there's so many bloodlines. I mean, you get these disgusting vampire type bloodlines, but they've mixed so many bloodlines. As we know, there's 13 of the bloodlines, 14 now with Ishmael.
Well, if the shadow Pope is an Orsini and Pope Francis is a Borgia, then that family still dominates every corner.
Right, absolutely.
And we know that they're in the Pesor family too, which is the Bourbons, and that's one of the secret families. So these fucking like little cockroaches, they're everywhere.
Well, baby, don't you worry. We're gonna hit that main hive soon. We're gonna hit that. Yeah, we see the main hive, and it's not nice little honeybees either that are making that hive. No, they're not nice little honeybees either.
I'm gonna leave a message for Pope Francis, because he claims to be a Borgia. You're just jealous that we're cuter than you. I'm sorry. You're way too inbred. Like, and I'm gonna tell you something to the Luma Schmati. Never underestimate how petty we can be. I will study I will find your family line. Don't you worry. I'm that petty, and I don't have kids. So I don't have anybody's dinner to cook. This is entertaining for me. This is entertainment for me. So don't you worry, Luma Schmati. And for Lucrezia and
Schmati.
Luma Schmati, wherever Sancha and Lucrezia are now, I just want those women to know we see you and we are so sorry. And for all the women, if there are any women watching right now that were born into these god-awful families, I know the world sees you as being blessed by the fortune of your finances, but we know the stress you're under. We see you. You are a human being, and you should never have anybody touch you without your permission, hurt you without. It's not acceptable. We understand you are just as enslaved as we are, as the peasantry class, that you're just as enslaved as we are. So even probably more so. So Brice is a bloodhound and a pit bull. She will find you. I will find you, and I will say, bless your heart when I see you. And that basically means you're a dumbass.
Bless your cut.
Bless your heart. We found you.
Nice one today, Brice. I say thank you. And I say thank you to all our usual suspects for joining us in the chit chat. Always fantastic to have you guys here, and look forward to seeing you this week again. You probably won't see me tomorrow, but Wednesday with again Jessie and Brice again. What are we doing on
We're going to talk
solutions?
about Gemma Galgani, who was also a stigmatic, a female. That's very interesting. Stigmatic. We're going to talk
Wow.
about Wednesday.
Okay, so we will see you back with Brice on Wednesday and bloody, 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 blah. Okay, everybody, God bless you all. Take good care of yourselves and have a fabulous week. And remember, don't be naughty now.
Don't be a Borgia.
Don't be naughty. Be good, but if you can't be good at it. I like it like that. Bye-bye.